Fluffy vibes in the unicorn zone. Corsi's leading with a megaphone. Sparkling minds with a playful twist. Fluffy atheism can't resist.
Okay, everybody, just as a reminder, we're going to be starting a 8-minute opening. This is going to be Fenrir versus Bellop. The question that's been posed is... Oh, fuck me sideways.
I mean, that's
a reasonable interpretation of Hume's problem of induction is that induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. Fenrir takes the positive and will be going first. Bellop takes the negative. We are going to be doing 8-minute opening statements, 5-minute rebuttal, and 10-minute cross-examination. We're going to be, like I said, we're going to be starting with Fenrir. Because we're doing this in a regular chat, I'm going to be asking everybody to keep their muzzle shut while the two are debating. Anybody that does interrupt is going to be red mic'd immediately and will not have the red mic removed until the end of the debate. So at this time, Fenrir, are you ready?
I am.
Your time will start when you begin speaking.
Alright, good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Corsi for moderating Fluffy Atheism for hosting my first protest debate. Fuck the admins. Thank you, Bellop, for being my first interlocutor. It took us a while to find out where we disagree, didn't it? We meet today in the dialectical fields of battle to discuss the following: whether or not a reasonable interpretation of the conclusion of Hume's problem of induction is that induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. Now, because Bellop has previously agreed with me that the SCP article on the topic represents the problem of induction well, I will begin by citing it. P1, there are only two kinds of arguments: demonstrative deductive and probable inductive, Hume's fork. P2, inference I presupposes the uniformity principle. One can identify the uniformity principle as the future being uniform to or similar with the past. First horn of the fork. P3, a demonstrative deductive argument establishes a conclusion whose negation is a contradiction. P4, the negation of the UP is not a contradiction. C1, there is no demonstrative deductive argument for the UP. Second horn of the fork. P5, any probable argument for the UP presupposes the UP. P6, an argument for a principle may not presuppose the same principle, what we may call non-circularity. C2, there is no probable argument for the UP. Consequences. C3, there is no argument for the UP. P7, if there is no argument for the UP, there is no chain of reasoning from the premises to the conclusion of any inference that presupposes the UP. C4, there is no chain of reasoning from the premises to the conclusion of inference I. P8, if there is no chain of reasoning from the premises to the conclusion of inference I, the inference is not justified. C5, inference I is not justified. The entire debate is going to hinge on whether or not this is a reasonable interpretation of C5. Soon I will have an argument this is in fact extremely reasonable, but first this debate needs to be correctly framed and why I believe my opponent has adopted a next to impossible burden in this debate by hinging the notion he is contesting on the idea of reasonability. I want to give a brief overview of justification as is meant by the conclusion and what philosophers and lay people will agree on. Then I will identify what we mean in English by a guarantee as it relates to Hume's argument. Finally, I want to discuss variants of reasonability, reasonability's relationship to language, both general and philosophical, and the insanely limited scope available to my opponent to contest this, if such a contest is even possible. Where I will identify problems it seems to me he must avoid to be able to make any headway in this debate whatsoever. Justification in this argument means something very specific that can be isolated rather quickly, to prove or show to be just, right, or reasonable, to make warranted, valid, or well-grounded. This implies an empirical or rational truth-at basis, not merely relying on assertion, but on structures and methods that show to correspond reliably. In philosophy, this argument, and in English, that takes the following forms: the deductive, inductive, and abductive. There may possibly be others based on context or truth-aptedness in the future. A favorite possible candidate of mine would be adjective or descriptive metaphorical truth like that found in stories, but in general this category is rejected. For our purposes in this argument, all we really need to understand is that Hume's fork is generally taken to be very formidable. The deduction and induction are the only options because abduction is ultimately a form of induction, and other forms invite contradictions or unnecessary problems. Because those are the two options available, they make up both sides of Hume's fork, and C5 is ultimately necessitated. Next, a guarantee. Most people here will know what a guarantee is, but just to make it plain for the purposes of this conversation, a guarantee is an assurance or promise of a high degree of reliability, usually that inspires confidence in an outcome. Most of the time in philosophy, when the word guarantee is mentioned, you are either going to be talking about the fact that true premises and a valid argument guarantees a conclusion, or you will be speaking about a government guaranteeing rights or security or systems in a political sense. A guarantee in everyday language also means a promise based on commitments if conditions are met. For example, your car insurance guarantees you some kind of payout or coverage if you were in a car accident, presumably. But that type of guarantee is based on experience and is not the same type of deductive guarantee. For example, if your car insurance finds a technicality or a reason not to pay you out, it's not like the universe ceases to exist because a logical contradiction has taken place. Notice how, with this understanding of guarantee, we have described both halves of Hume's fork, the deductive and the inductive. Next, reasonableness, which we might characterize as sound judgment from available information, and this is what will take the most time, as this is the hinge that I believe will be the overt death of my opponent. I would like to point out that philosophers and people familiar with David Hume do not have a monopoly on what is reasonable. We might call such a view specialized reasonableness that requires some special circumstance or training to get. Imagine for me you are in line at the grocery store, and a person in front of you accosts another person in front of you with abrupt and decisive force. You watch in bizarre amazement as the assaulter pins the victim to the ground and pulls out a knife. You are horrified and surprised at the violence, but seeing the deadly weapon rallies you to the stranger's defense. Imagine if when you caught the hand with the blade in it, the assailant turns to you and says, "I'm a doctor, please." Notice quickly that if this person is a doctor and you are not, there are a whole host of actions that are reasonable for this person to take because of their specialized position and training that are unavailable to you. If they notice something you didn't about another person, they could break their ribs, they could take a vial out of their bag and stab the other person with it and expose them to a foreign substance. They could immobilize them and abduct with them to what would probably be a hospital. They could enlist law enforcement with the help of such actions or guarantee their security or lack of public interference while they carry out these actions. All of which would be beyond your scope, or more importantly for our purposes, would be reasonable for them to carry out because of their specialized training, but not for you to even dream of attempting. This is a problem for my opponent, because if his explanation for why the interpretation is not reasonable is in any way bolstered by some esoteric knowledge of Hume or philosophy or anything else, it immediately becomes suspect, because that is not what normal, ordinary people who encounter this argument are going to mean when they discuss reasonability of its interpretations. For something to be reasonable, we do not mean reasonable for only specialists with advanced training, hardly ever. We more often mean public standards applying to socialized groups of people with intersubjective, holistic, and average understandings. In other words, we are invoking a global rather than a local, or a general unspecialized rather than singular specialized notion of reasonability. We can call this the complexity problem for my opponent, because if his argument becomes so complex we are required to be the doctor, not the layperson, for understanding it, it suffers for that reason, and the general global reasonableness is not affected at all. Back to the supermarket line, if you will continue to indulge me. You have the assailant's arm caught, and they look at you pleadingly and tell you that they are a doctor and say please. What is a reasonable response to this? What type of reasonable interpretation are there? Letting their hand go, I would argue, is extremely reasonable, for this person is claiming to have specialized knowledge you don't, and therefore may have a very good justification for their actions that is unknown to you, like we just got through discussing. Even though there is a general understanding that most people who seemingly out of nowhere attack others with knives are dangerous psychopaths, there is a general understanding as well that doctors moving quickly and decisively to remove others from harm is very beneficial. Hesitating and freezing, and not letting go of the hand with the knife in it, I would argue, is also an extremely reasonable move. After all, you were just put in an incredibly rare, high-stakes moment of decision that could cost someone their life if you chose wrong. Either way.
30 seconds.
Maybe this person is lying about being a doctor to kill their target. Maybe you two are in danger the moment you release the weapon. Maybe hesitating a second will allow you to make a more informed decision. Surely waiting for better data is also reasonable. This is going to be a problem for Bellop, it's going to turn out, because even if he were to prove the contradiction of what we're supposing, it wouldn't affect the reasonableness at all. We're going to call that the reductio problem. I will put, because of a lack of time, I will put a syllogism demonstrating why I think it's reasonable in the side chat, at least a simplified version. I have a more complex version.
Okay.
And we will call my opening there.
Alrighty. Alrighty. We have 8 minutes for Bellop. Are you ready?
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to copy Fenrir's argument.
You want the simplified version or the complex version?
Both if possible.
I'll give you both.
Okay,
yeah,
no, that's fine. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I have a little presentation. Can people see my screen?
It's coming up. It's up. I will start your timer when you start speaking.
Alright, okay, so thanks everyone for listening in. Thanks Fenrir for agreeing to debate me, and thanks Corsi for moderating. So today we're debating the debate proposition. A reasonable interpretation of the conclusion of Hume's problem of induction is that induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. And I'm saying this is just obviously false. Okay, so I just want to clarify, so the debate's not focusing on Hume's attack of induction, so you can think that Hume is successful or Hume is not as successful. But that's immaterial to the debate we're having. And also, we're not debating that an inductive inference guarantees the truth of the conclusion. Obviously it doesn't. That's not what we're discussing at all. Alright, so get some definitions off the table. So an inductive argument is one in which the premises make it more likely for the conclusion to be true, although it doesn't necessitate it. And by contrast, an inductive argument are those that make their conclusions merely more probable. They, for example, most Greeks ate olives, Socrates is a Greek, therefore Socrates eats olives. You can affirm both of the premises, but you can deny the conclusion without contradiction. But it's still cogent, so it makes more likely the conclusion to be true. And assuming the truth of the premises, it is likely that Socrates eats olives, but it's not guaranteed. According to this view, the argument is inductive, right? Not guaranteed. And this is just from Internet Encyclopedia. Okay, so this might be more relevant to the debate we're having. This example. So observation A is true, observation B is true, C is true, therefore it's likely that generalization is true. This example illustrates an inductive argument where the conclusion is based on observed instances and generalizes to the ability to fly to all birds. While the conclusion is likely to be true, it is possible to encounter a bird species that cannot fly. I want to just make a note, the italicized, that's not my italicizing, that's just from A-level philosophy. The bold is mine. Okay, so what does it mean to logically guarantee something? To logically guarantee means the argument is valid. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true without exception. This is because the argument's form itself prevents a scenario where the true premises lead to a false conclusion. This is from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. In effect, an argument is valid if the truth of the premises logically guarantees the truth of the conclusion. So this is logically guarantees. They use the exact terminology as the debate proposition, right? And this is just from Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's just a pretty standard notion that if something logically guarantees the conclusion, then it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. And by contrast, inductive arguments are said to be those that make their conclusions merely more probable, not logically guaranteed. Okay, so the takeaway of this is that inductive inference means that conclusion is not logically necessitated by the premises. It's built into the definition of induction. How long have I got, Corsi? Sorry.
About 5 minutes.
Corsi? 5 minutes?
About 5 minutes.
So, sure. So the takeaway here is that it just means if an inductive argument is inductive, the conclusion doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. That's just what induction means, basically. And so if it turns out that the main point of one of the most well-known and influential pieces of philosophy in the Western canon is just pointing out this fact, it will certainly be surprising. It's just a sort of a trivial fact. Yeah. Okay, so my quick formulation of Hume's argument, I think Fenrir gave a pretty decent, like he read off the SEP, I'm happy to go with that. That's quickly my interpretation. Two ways of justifying a belief through reasoning experience. Sometimes it's referred to as inductive or deductive in the SEP, sometimes a priori, a posteriori. I'm using Hume's language. So Hume, when he was writing the treatise on human nature, human experience, can't remember, but he used reasoning and experience. The principle, uniformity principle, cannot be justified through reasoning. There's no contradiction in supposing it's false. Premise 3, the uniformity principle cannot be justified through experience, as would be circular, and it's not justified, therefore induction relies on a principle that's unjustified. Okay, now the conclusion, here's the main part, right? Hume is arguing that induction provides no reason to think that its conclusion is true. Right, that's the really important part. No reason, and I'm going to back that up with quotes. This Peter Millikan is a scholar. He specializes in Hume and Humean thinking. This is Hume speaking at the top, the italicized part. So we conclude in the foregoing section that all reasonings from experience, there's a step taken by the mind which is not supported by any argument or process of the understanding. And here Peter Millikan says, so all reasonings from experience involve a step, namely the assumption of uniformity, which is not supported by any process of the understanding, which indeed cannot be supported. So cannot be supportive if Hume's argument is correct. Here we go. This is again taken from Peter Millikan. So this is him laying out the conclusion. Look, no probable argument is rationally justified. Rationally justified meaning inductive or deductive. And there is no good argument of any kind for the uniformity principle. There's no inductive, abductive, deductive argument. Okay, so a quick note. There's room for debate over the intended scope of Hume's own conclusion, but the fact remains that Hume has throughout history been predominantly read as presenting an argument for inductive skepticism. That's just a quick note on, like, you know. Okay, so here's other philosophers agreeing with me. So Hume's point is not, this is basically denying the debate proposition outright. Hume's point is not merely the relatively tame conclusion that we're not warranted in making any predictions with total certainty. Hume's conclusion is more radical, that we are not entitled to any degree of confidence whatsoever, no matter how slight, in any predictions regarding what we have not observed. And Mark Lang, again, he's a professor of philosophy. He's, I think, specializes in philosophy of science. Hume concludes, again, this is saying the conclusion, therefore, that we cannot justify the principle of induction with an inductive argument. So the conclusion is that the essential inductive and therefore scientific principle, the future will resemble the past, cannot be proven. No certain or probable, right, arguments can justify the future will resemble the past principle. Okay, so hammering the point home, why is the debate proposition false? A reasonable interpretation of the conclusion of Hume's problem of induction is that induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. Logically guarantee the conclusion, that's just basically, it's valid. It's a deductively valid form. So that sort of reduces down to, that part that I've highlighted in yellow reduces down to basically deduction. So if something does logically guarantee the conclusion, it's deductive. So it basically, on Fenrir's interpretation, it's that induction is not deduction. That's not what Hume is saying, right? Because presumably you could have something that's not a deductive argument, but it still makes more likely the conclusion true. Hume is saying not only can you not have deduction, but you cannot have an inductive support for the uniformity principle. And so on my interpretation, what I'm saying, sorry? 30 seconds? 20 years, okay. So on my interpretation, induction is based on principle of uniformity that's not justified either by deduction or induction. No justification for believing the future will be like the past. And justification, again, it does not necessarily mean that knowledge requires certainty. So justification, presumably you can have inductive justification or abductive justification without having logical, you know, a deductive argument. So I run out of time, but yeah, there we go. Thanks.
Alrighty. So at this point, we are going to be starting 5-minute rebuttals. We'll be doing the 10-minute cross-examination afterwards. So at this point, Fenrir, you can have your 5-minute rebuttal, and I will start the timer when you start speaking.
Yeah, I think I can grant my opponent's, most of my entire opponent's opening, and I still don't think, because of my opening, I still don't think there's even a contention, because I already explained what a guarantee means in English, right? And I explained what it means carefully in philosophy as well. It is true that guarantee does often mean in philosophy the soundness of a conclusion, meaning a valid argument with true premises guarantees a true conclusion. That is true. However, also in political philosophy, I pointed out that a guarantee is inductive, and I gave the example of car insurance. If my opponent has ever signed up for car insurance or ever had a business or another person guarantee him anything, he also knows that guarantee in English can also mean an inductive guarantee, meaning that there's no modal collapse if a car insurance salesman fails to pay him out after he's in a car accident. Again, also, when I talked about reasonableness and I talked about how two contradictory types of action or interpretation could be both reasonable, as in my doctor taking out a knife to stab somebody. You are reasonable to release their arm if they tell you that you're a doctor and you're running on limited information. You are also reasonable to hold their arm and keep them from doing what you think they might do, which is maybe hurt that person. So again, both can be reasonable, both can be guaranteed. I can still use the English guarantee of induction just fine, and this still be, and I can agree with Bellop as to the end of his opening. I could say Hume's point is obviously that induction is neither deductively justified or inductively justified, meaning it is neither justified in the general philosophical guaranteed sense of deduction, and it is further not justified in the English sort of business sense of a guarantee either, where I guarantee you something in a business transaction in exchange for collateral. So I can just grant my opponent's entire opening, and it doesn't affect the reasonableness of my interpretation at all. And in fact, he seems to agree with me on this understanding of guarantee, but we can see what he has to say. I will concede the rest of my rebuttal.
Okay. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Bellop, I will start when you're ready.
How long do I have for a rebuttal?
5 minutes. He only took about 2.5.
Okay. Cool. Alright, so I'm just going to share my screen again, really quickly. Okay, I should be sharing. Fenrir's response is basically just saying that, well, look, guarantee can mean sort of like in the sort of more broad lens, in the sort of more narrower, like, valid sense. And guarantee, maybe that's true, but that's just not the debate proposition. Because he's taking away logically. The debate proposition is induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. Now, there's a standard notion in philosophy, right, that logically guarantees. This is from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's generally pretty reputable. And if we type in logically guarantee, look, the premises logically guarantee an instance of the conclusion. Validity describes a particular relationship between the premises and the conclusion, namely in all cases, the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, or to use more technical language, the premises logically guarantee an instance of the conclusion. This is standard in the philosophical literature. Again, I haven't looked at that, validity and soundness. Let's have a look at that. Logically, let's see. Yeah, okay. Obviously, the premises in this argument are not true. It may be hard to imagine these premises being true, but it's not hard to see that if it were true, their truth would logically guarantee the conclusion's truth, right? That means that if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true, on pain of contradiction, right? That's the standard notion in the philosophical literature. And so, you know, in Fenrir's opening statement, he said a few things. Guarantee can mean to a high degree of probability. So he's saying that, you know, using the term more loosely than a logical entailment. But that's okay. Maybe in natural language, guarantee is used that way, but not in logically guarantee. That has a standard notion in the philosophical literature of meaning valid, and he's not using it that way. So this turns out to be a semantic dispute. But I want to point out, I want to emphasize that even though it's a semantic dispute, it seems at this point that the standard notion of the philosophical literature agrees with me, right? Hume's pointing out a lot more than just an inductive argument doesn't logically entail the conclusion. Hume's argument is saying a lot more than that. It's saying that you can't have logical, it doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion, nor does it even support the conclusion in any way. Fenrir in his opening said, you can't use esoteric language. Again, I pointed out just using the first one that comes up on Google. This is not esoteric language. It's just the standard language in the philosophical literature. Fenrir said you need global interpretation, but we're having a sort of philosophical discussion. It matters what the philosophical literature says, and you're just talking past people when you say, induction. Hume was pointing out that induction logically doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. Hume was pointing out a lot more than that, and to say that you're using it in sort of like you're just using guarantee in a broader sense, that's missing the point of the discussion. Anyway, I'm not even using like esoteric language. This is just standard in the literature. It just seems to me just sort of obvious what's happening. I'm happy to conclude there.
Okay. That made me happy. Both of them were early on that one.
Cross-exam.
Now we're going to get into the fun part. Cross-examination time. Again, since Fenrir is taking the positive, he will be going first. So whenever you start your first question, I will start the 10-minute timer. On you.
All right, so Bellop, you and I have both gone over SCP's formulation of the problem of induction several times, right?
Yeah.
And I'm obviously aware that the first horn of the problem is that Hume demonstrates that the conclusion doesn't logically follow deductively, right? So the sort of this strict notion of guarantee you're trying to hold me to, right? So did you think that when I was saying guarantee, that I was saying that I thought Hume's argument stopped at the first horn? Because obviously there's the second horn where it talks about induction, right?
Yeah, of course. I did take it that you were just talking about the first one, because logically guarantee. You keep saying guarantee. The wording in the debate proposition is really precise. It's logically guaranteed, and that's different from just like guarantee in natural language.
Well, logically guaranteed, like when I tell somebody that something is logically guaranteed on Discord, right, what I would mean, I could mean it in the strict philosophy, I could say that it deductively follows, but often that's not what I mean. Usually I just mean that it's reasonable, right? And if it's reasonable, right, through induction or some other means, or through abduction, or through like natural language, with adjective truth, right, where we don't have inductive defeaters, right? So there are a whole host of ways something could be reasonable. But just because I say logically guarantee, right, I could easily be talking about, oh, just rational. It's rational to think something, right?
You could mean that, but that's not the standard notion.
It's the standard notion to lay people, right? Which is why I gave in my opening, I said it would behoove us to be the lay person and not the doctor, right? Because there are things that are reasonable for the doctor to do, but not a lay person trying to communicate, right?
I mean, I'm not really sure what the lay understanding of it is. I mean, like when I hear logically guarantee, I mean like, oh, it's valid.
Have you wait?
I'm taking a debate about a philosophical notion.
Hold on, like, just real quick. I don't want to be a jerk about it, but it is kind of my time to control. Are you familiar? So I gave 2 examples when I spoke about guarantee in philosophy specifically. I talked about deductive guarantee, like the soundness from validity. But I also talked about it in terms of political philosophy. Are you familiar with the way guarantee is used there?
No.
Okay, so a state guaranteeing its citizens' rights in exchange for guaranteeing its self-defense, right? Or in exchange for taxes, right?
Sorry, who do you mean?
That's not logically guaranteeing.
But it is guaranteeing philosophy. Shut up, Ben.
But
it is guaranteeing
what you mean?
It is guaranteeing philosophy,
name?
Though, right?
Can you drop it down?
Okay, I'm happy that there's guarantee used in sort of a more general sense, but that's not the wording of the debate proposition. It's logically guaranteed.
Oh, it's not the way you took. Wait, stop. It's not the way you took the wording of the debate proposition, but I would say that your strictness is kind of unreasonable, right?
No, absolutely not.
No? Okay. If I hold up a index card, right, and I have a square like written on it, right, just a square shape, okay, and I show it to you, and you tell me, hey, that's not a circle. Is that a reasonable interpretation of what's going on?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is it logically entailed that if something isn't deductively guaranteed, and something isn't inductively guaranteed either in any kind of colloquial sense, it's not logically guaranteed in any sense, right?
Sorry, say that last question again.
Yeah, so Hume's fork, right, is deductive and inductive. We both granted, and I don't know why you thought that I only thought the first horn of Hume's problem applied, right, the deductive form, right? It doesn't deductively guarantee anything, and it doesn't inductively guarantee anything either. Why? Because we have no deductive priors. So if it doesn't guarantee in either sense, a good interpretation of what's going on is, hey, this doesn't logically guarantee anything, right?
No, that's not, I don't agree that that's.
No,
I mean, that might be your interpretation.
Do you have an argument? Do you have an argument, right? So I want an argument that avoids the complexity problem, right? I want an argument that avoids some kind of quantitative problem where you're just equivocating on language and are going to hold me to a notion of guarantee that I never meant and would have clarified for you, right, on the spot, right? Can you give me an argument for why my interpretation is not reasonable, knowing what I mean by guarantee?
It's not reasonable because you're having a philosophical debate. You agreed to a debate proposition where if on the standard notion of logically guarantee, which I cited you from peer-reviewed sources, it comes out as false. On the standard philosophical notions of the terms we're using, the debate proposition turns out to be false. Right? That's what I'm saying.
Well, this is another problem for you because even false interpretations, right, could be reasonable ones, right? So if a jury reaches a false conclusion, right, based on some reasonable standard of evidence, right, it's not even going to be the case that only true things, right, are reasonable. So it seems like I can just dismiss that out of hand, right?
I mean, I agree that people can come to reasonable conclusions even though they're false.
Right. So let's say that I was just unaware. Like, let's say Haiti and like everybody else that has just failed to correct me so far was just unaware of this like nuanced, very strict take. Right. I don't think anybody else who read the debate contention, by the way, took this as a strict deductive guarantee because they would have known Hume's argument. But let's pretend that they did. Right? Was that a reasonable thing for all of us not to know or not to act upon? Was your understanding of this?
It's not just my understanding. It's the standard notion in the literature. And yeah, I think...
Well, it's even Hume's understanding of the first horn, right? But there is a second horn, right? Wait, hold on. I'm just do you think it more likely, right, that I'm representing what I took guarantee to mean honestly, or do you think that everyone, when they talk about Hume's problem of induction and reads what the debate contention is, right, who thinks that what they're thinking instead is something like, oh, just only the first horn of Hume's problem exists. Only the deductive part exists, the inductive part doesn't. Is that what you think we're all thinking?
I think a lot of people think that. Yeah.
I think that's kind of ridiculous. I really do, right?
I don't, because I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they seem not to understand the problem of induction.
No, well, I'll go further than that. When most theists on this server talk about the problem of induction, it's like, well, how do you justify induction at all? Like, they are quite aware, right, that if you don't intake induction as justifying in some way, right, then there seems to be no non-circular way to do this. Like, everyone on the server, I think, is very well aware of the limitations and nuances of the problem of induction and how you can't justify it deductively or inductively. And if a guarantee in everyday language, just real quick, while it is my time, have you ever gone through like a checkout counter and bought like a warranty or a repair guarantee on something you've bought? You are aware of the way this is used in English, right?
I noticed that you've still dropped the logically in front of the guarantee, but yes.
Yeah, I don't expect someone at a checkout counter to logically guarantee you like repair on your I don't know, your air conditioning unit, right?
Yeah, that's weird wording, right? Because it's a sort of philosophical term, logically guarantee.
Yes, but I've already shown you in other areas of philosophy it doesn't mean that either. In political philosophy it doesn't mean that either. The state isn't logically guaranteeing you, right, freedom from I don't know, subjugation by a foreign power. It's going to do everything it can to meet that burden. But that's a guarantee in philosophy that isn't deductive either.
I mean, you actually haven't shown that.
Wait, hold on. Don't you think that you're just fishing for an area for us to disagree on?
No, I don't think there's any substantive disagreement. I'm not sure there's a substantive disagreement. It seems like we're disagreeing about semantics.
Wait, hold on. Well, no, that can't be right, because Blackout took a poll on like 12 theists, and like they all agreed with Blackout that there was a substantive disagreement. So that can't be true, because I can't be smarter than 13 theists. So,
what was the substantive
with that punchline, I'll end my cross.
I was asking, like, what was the substantive disagreement?
Hey, this is a structured debate. We're not interrupting it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay, so we have... Now it's Bellop's turn to use cross-examination, and we'll get started with your 10-minute cross-examination as soon as you start.
Okay, yeah. So... I'll just respond to the last question. I did think there was a substantive disagreement throughout most of our discussions.
Man.
I'm wrong about that. Also, this is just like Google AI or something. It's not. I don't take it to be, amazingly reliable. But I took guarantee in political philosophy, and it says logically guarantee refers to validity where the truth of the premise make it impossible for the conclusion to be
look,
false.
dude, unless Google AI is going to give you a question to give me, probably not the time.
Sure. So, do you have a source that logically guarantee used in political philosophy, doesn't mean, soundness in the validity in the normal.
Yeah, no, the sovereign isn't logically guaranteeing you anything in your sense of the word.
That's just the stand. Okay, do you disagree that the standard notion of logically guarantee in philosophy, the standard notion is that the truth of the premises necessarily entail the truth of the conclusion?
Yep, I already granted you that in my opening.
Okay, great. So, so you affirmed, according to the standard philosophical usages of the word, the debate proposition is false.
No, not all of them. No, not all of them. I already look. I told you if you're going to hold me to the true deduction, right? The first horn, by the way, right? If you come away from discussion of an argument,
All right,
right?
this is still my turn. This is still my turn.
It is.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
look, I mean, I've shown you literally quotes from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where it says that logically guarantees means that the truth of the premises, the truth of the conclusion follows necessarily from the truth of the premises.
Yep.
So the standard notion of logically guarantee, right, means that the truth of the premises entails the truth of the conclusion, logically.
Yep, and that is definitely one of the things Hume is saying, right?
Of course, it's absolutely one of the things that Hume is saying, but that's not a reasonable interpretation of his conclusion, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah. I still think it is. Nothing you showed me so far indicates that it's not.
Not according to the standard. Not according to the standard definition of logically guaranteed.
Yeah. So again, and by the way, logically also, as I explained to you, could mean deductively in the strict sense you're using, but logically could also mean reasonably. It could also mean, hey, it follows. It could also mean, hey, it's reasonable to expect the sun to rise tomorrow.
That's not the standard notion in philosophy.
But it is in English, so.
I'm not even sure of that, but I'll just grant it to you for the sake of argument. The point is, you took a debate. You took a debate, right? Where it's about a philosophical argument, right? So why are you taking a philosophical argument and then using interpretation of logically guarantee that's different from the standard philosophical notion?
Well, again, as I've explained to you twice or three times now, there are a couple different ways guarantee is used in philosophy. In the strict sense you were using, right, where it only applies to the deductive.
No, you keep taking out logically. You're talking about just guarantee. I'm talking about logically guarantee. As far as I'm aware, there's only one notion of logically guarantee in philosophy. I'm happy to grant that there might be some, other more esoteric term that I haven't, or usage that I haven't heard about. But you seem to have agreed that the standard notion of logically guarantee in philosophy is deductive, right?
Sure.
Yes? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So on that interpretation, the standard interpretation in philosophy, does the debate proposition turn out to be false? Yes or no?
Let's see, let me read it again. Yeah, if we were going to use your strict version, probably. Yeah, it would probably resolve false.
Okay, so...
But that's obviously not what I meant by the debate contention, right? That's never what I meant.
Yeah. You didn't mean that. That's not... Look.
Well, that's a bummer, isn't it?
What?
It doesn't mean we're talking past each other. It means there's no true contention.
Look, it's still my time. The point is...
It is.
Why would you take a debate, a philosophical debate, where on the standard philosophical interpretation of these words,
why did I take this debate? Yeah, you were desperate for a contention. You were desperate for a contention. When I parsed your lousy wording one of three ways, I finally got you to say, I disagree with this, and I agree with this. And on my reading, right, my agreement is reasonable, and on your reading, your disagreement is also reasonable. Which means the debate is conceded.
Look, I don't care about all this. Look, my point is...
You asked why.
It's still my time. On the standard interpretation, on the standard philosophical interpretation of logically guarantees, the debate proposition turns out to be false. And you've agreed with that. Wait, hold on. Okay, have you agreed? No, never mind. It's not my time. You've agreed with that, right?
Yep.
That on the standard interpretation of logically guarantees in philosophy, the debate proposition turns out to be false.
Yep. Yeah.
Look, I mean, do you want me to... Okay, I'll read out more. Like, it's just... Like, I've read from you, from the, Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Here's an introduction to formal logic from Cambridge University. Let's see. So I'm reading out. I can share my screen, but in a minute. In each case, the truth of the premises would logically guarantee the truth of the conclusion. And they're talking about deductive arguments. Right? This is not esoteric. There's not like multiple interpretations that are like equally as used. There's one standard interpretation across the philosophical literature. Like that was in my introduction. You're taking debate proposition, right?
Is there a question in here?
And you're talking about natural language, but that's completely like that's just strange.
Yeah,
to take
I think it's reasonable. I think it's very reasonable for someone to use language naturally. I think that's very reasonable. Yeah.
No, but in the natural look, the point is that you're talking about a philosophical argument. We're having a philosophical debate.
Well, one of us is.
Humans. And you seem not to be having a philosophical debate. You seem to just be talking about, oh yeah, but guarantee and political philosophy guarantee doesn't mean that. Well, that's fine, but even that again, you keep dropping the logically. Why do you always drop the logically?
Well, you can keep the logically. I would just take it to be synonymous with reasonable or rational. Yeah. I think it's rational to use language reasonably. Yeah. It's rational to use language in a natural way. And by the way, my syllogism, by the way, for why I showed it to be reasonable, shows deduction and induction in the guarantee. It says, doesn't deductively guarantee, doesn't inductively guarantee, reasonable inference, doesn't guarantee, doesn't logically guarantee at all, doesn't reasonably guarantee at all, doesn't guarantee.
Look, the debate proposition is really clear. Right? A reasonable interpretation of the conclusion of Hume's problem of induction is that induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. And I read out like 3 standard sources on which logically guarantees comes out as deductive. And you're saying there's other interpretations. You haven't quoted any sources.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, other reasonable interpretations of what's going on here.
Like, who says that? Who says that?
Yeah, my citation is the English language, and the people listening.
Can you give me an... Yeah, but that's just... Look, I don't even think that logically guarantee in natural language means what you think it means, but maybe it does. That's fine. But we're having a sort of like a philosophical discussion, and you're just using language that's out of accord with the standard philosophical usage.
Is that reasonable for me to do?
No,
wait, hold on. Just real quick. Is it reasonable for me to be the layperson, not the doctor?
What? You don't need... I don't even have a degree in philosophy. I've taken some logic courses at university.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me that. That's fine, right? What about my interpretation is not reasonable, Bellop?
It's not reasonable because logically, right, refers to logic.
Yeah, but wait, hold on. Are we in agreement, though? And I realize it's your time, but are we in agreement that if I'm reading it my way and not your way, it's very reasonable?
If you change, yeah, so I agree. If you take logically guaranteed,
I don't think there's a contention here, Bellop. Do you?
If you take logically guaranteed to just mean justify in any sense, then sure, I agree with you.
Time is up. So we are in open discussion at this point, and this is going exactly the way I thought it would. Just as a reminder to everybody, because we've had a lot of people joining in, and there's a lot of text in the side chat. This entire debate, this one-on-one debate, and I apologize for those that want to jump in. However, God, it's way up here. Son of a biscuit. There it is. So the debate proposition is a reasonable interpretation of Hume's problem of induction is that induction doesn't logically guarantee the conclusion. Fenrir is saying this is true by saying the positive. Bellop is giving the negative. So we are going to continue, and this is going to be open discussion. They can go back and forth. It goes as long as you two want.
Sure. Okay.
Anyone else comment?
Not yet.
Not yet. So Bellop, right? I was very clear in my opening Wait, hold on. I said I could concede your entire opening. Could you have conceded my entire opening?
No, you said things that I think that are false. That, using, if we go on some different, like, esoteric, like you use the term esoteric language, but I showed you sources. This is not that.
I used it once. Yeah, I used it once. It's just it's a beautiful word. I used it once.
I know it is a beautiful word, but the interpretation of logically guarantee, my interpretation, is not that esoteric. It's any introduction to logic book. Any introduction to logic book would use this in my way.
Wait, hold on. Do you think most of the population has ever even cracked open a book on logic?
Of course not. Having a philosophical
discussion
seems not engaging.
No. Yeah, so I engage with this server and in general, right? As if I'm trying to communicate, right, to a broad swath of people, right? Or trying to teach a broad swath of people, or trying to bring my specialized expertise to them in such a way that they can find easily digestible, so that if they do have interesting commentary from their fields of specialization, right, or special ways to challenge me, right, they're able to do that. Does this strike you as reasonable?
Of course, but
okay. Okay,
just
cool.
on that, I just wanted to follow up question. Why wouldn't you say the conclusion of Hume's argument is saying that there's no justification at all for induction? That's much more plain language. Logically entailed.
No, wait, stop. Because that is C5. That's not an interpretation of C5. You just quoted C5. Inference I is not justified is C5, right?
Yeah, at all, right?
Yes,
inference
at all.
Not justified.
If you take Hume's
there's no inductive or deductive support.
Dude, this is in my syllogism, showing the reasonableness of my interpretation.
Yeah, but look, again, you're taking a philosophical notion, right?
And why is it not reasonable for me to do that? Why can I not do that? Why can I not use logically to mean both the strict logical or the broader reasonable, justifiable, well-warranted, well-justified, right? This strikes me as a conglomeration of synonyms that I think a lot of people take roughly to mean the same thing anyway, right?
I don't think so. Look, I mean, that's not...
You don't think so? Okay.
That's not...
I think you're the outlier then.
Look, I'm happy to be wrong about that. It's immaterial to the discussion. Look, you started the debate by reading a pretty technical argument from... It's not that technical, but it's, it's a philosophical argument in premises and conclusion. And then you talk about logically guaranteeing in a notion that's completely different from the very source that you originally started the debate with.
That also... philosophy. Yeah, no. So first of all, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is much harder for a layperson to get through. Like the Stanford.
I know.
Like I misread the Stanford Encyclopedia. Stop.
You started with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
I did.
You started with something that you've actually agreed is a lot harder to understand for the layperson.
Why?
And then you're using terms that completely out of accord with the layperson.
Bellop, why did I say in my opening I used the SCP? Why did I say I did that?
I don't know, you wanted it... Oh, because I agreed with that.
Because you agreed. It's the touchstone for you and I to start on, because you and I have already agreed that we can start there, right? Do you think if I'm starting... Okay.
You know that I agree. You know that I agree that you know that I use the term logically guarantee in a more formal sense. So why would you?
Well, no. First of all, I didn't know that. I didn't care to know that.
What?
So, yeah, I don't care what you think about the problem of induction or justification. Like, unless it's better, unless you have a better model than mine, why would I give it? Why would I care?
Well, Look, I mean, I'm using the standard notion. I'm using the standard terminology.
I can use that notion, obviously, but that's not the way I communicate about these issues to the rest of Discord.
You're talking to me. You took a debate. I was very clear about my language, right? And you agreed to the debate with me.
You weren't clear at all. I'm still not clear on whether or not there's actually a disagreement taking place. Because I can just grant your strict interpretation, and I can grant that under your strict interpretation, the debate proposition is false. And it seems like, although you are resisting it, it seems like you could easily grant me my interpretation and notice, yes, not deductively guaranteed plus not inductively guaranteed means not guaranteed at all. Yeah, it seems like you could grant that. So
yeah, I mean, so if we, like your example, if you hold up a square, right, you draw a square and you say, is that a circle? And someone says yes, and they go, oh, by circle I mean a shape with 4 sides. Like, no, yeah, okay,
no, that's not. Like, no, that wasn't. Wait, hold on.
Now, you're going to presumably say that's unfair. That's an unfair characterization of what's happening because your interpretation is a lot more accepted.
Well, that's not what I said, right? So hold on. The square and circle example was clear, and it wasn't phrased the way you phrased it. So let me phrase it again, right? I asked you if someone holds up an index card and a square is painted on it, right? And the person who looks at the square goes, "Oh, that's not a circle," right? I asked if that was a reasonable interpretation, and the point of that example was, hey, it may not even be the optimal interpretation, but it's still a very reasonable one. Why? Because it is logically entailed by the content of what's going on. So, right, again, back to my example from a minute ago, if it doesn't deductively guarantee and it doesn't inductively guarantee, if those are the two halves of the fork, and that's the way you phrase it, the conclusion that it's not guaranteed in any sense, and you yourself said this in your opening, so you can grant it easily, it is not guaranteed. It is not justifiable in any way. Right?
If you just mean logically guarantee to be, it's not justified in any sense.
That wasn't the question I asked you, was it?
I thought it was.
No, I'll ask it again. If you take Hume's fork to be saying that it is not deductively guaranteed and it is not inductively guaranteed in any common language way, right? Conclusion, not deductively guaranteed plus not inductively guaranteed equals not logically, not rationally, not reasonably, not guaranteed, right?
That's
Did you say yep?
It's not inductively, it's not deductively guaranteed. That means that it's not logically guaranteed, it's not reasonably guaranteed, it's not inductively guaranteed.
Right.
Like, sure.
Love it.
Okay, that's sort of, that's an interpretation of Hume's argument.
Oh, so we didn't actually disagree then, did we?
Well, look, it's just really confusing because you're, like, when I was doing my research for this debate, I looked at, I already know how philosophy used logically guarantee, but I went to find sources, and every single source, and these aren't like really esoteric sources, these are just like standard logic, websites or standard logic books. Logically guarantee means that the argument necessarily entails the conclusion. And then you're using the words that aren't aligned with the standard words in philosophy.
Yeah, but they are aligned in English, right? Like, sorry? You've been able to understand everything I've said perfectly, right?
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I agree. So, just out of curiosity, so in the standard philosophical sense, the one that I've stated, is the debate proposition true or false?
No, I've already granted you that according to your strict reading, the debate proposition would be false. But I would have granted that at the beginning before we set the debate up. And in fact, in our 1,000-word search for a contention, because you were so desperate to disagree with me, I already did grant it. So, yeah.
You were... Look, you were so unclear in that.
I think we're just going to have to resign ourselves to the fact, the possibility that things that I do and the things I say might always be unclear to some, including you, Bellop. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are we done here?
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of things to do in my personal life, so...
Okay. This has been... I knew this was going to happen. I knew this was the way this was going to turn out, that they were just going to agree. But, having said that, this debate has been... Hold on, I'm literally wrapping it up. Having said that, the two have been in agreement the entire time, and just semantics is all this was over. So now that we have had the two sit down one-on-one, hold on.
Though,
okay.
That he admitted that he's using words that aren't the standard philosophical terminology. So you can understand why I got confused, right?
Hey, Bellop, out of curiosity, like, is there a recording or is there like a piece of evidence of me like yelling at you that to the extent that you know what you're talking about, there's no contention?
Yeah, you've yelled at me many times saying this.
Was that part of me yelling at you unclear? Was that one of the things you still struggled to understand?
I did struggle to understand what you were saying. Yeah.
What?
Bummer. Yeah, I think we're just not meant to communicate.
And on that note, I'm gonna open things up to open discussion. At that point, I'm going to, because open discussion can get a little rampant, I'm gonna close the recording. It's been 1 hour and 2 minutes. This has been a Fluffy Atheism debate. Have a fun day, and my goodness, let's get out of here.
Sparkling minds with a playful twist. Fluffy atheism.